Hey, how's everybody doing? In this video, I'm going to show you how to distort sub bass. We're going to talk about clipping and how I would go about doing this in one of my songs. So right now I have some things open to save time, but for starters, I got Serum open here, basic shape, sine wave. So sine waves are the best form of sub bass. It's what everybody's using for the most part. It's going to be your cleanest waveform to help push out the biggest, clearest sub bass in your mix. What I like about Serum in this visual waveform is it sort of shows you how the speaker moves. So a speaker only moves two ways. It moves in and out, right, or in and out. So this shows you, I don't know which way's in and which way's out, but it's the speaker's going to move one way this way in a clean parabolic, motion over time. It's going to move in, say, and then it's going to hit that middle point and move out in the same direction. And that's what this sounds like, right? This is a very low note. Hopefully you have good speakers that could sort of pick that up. And the fact that if you can't hear it, that's kind of the point in some cases to distort your sub bass to add the overtones in. But if we look at a square wave as opposed to the sine wave, this is essentially clipped, right? This is at full volume in one way and then all the way to the other side, holding it at the other side for a longer period of time. And so if I take the sine wave and I open up something called an oscilloscope, which I have here from a company called Melda Productions. An oscilloscope will show you what that waveform looks like. So this is that sine wave right now. See, essentially, it's the same visual as what you saw in Serum. Now, if we turn on the clipper, and I have this set to about 50% right now, because at 100%, that is 0 dB, but we want it to clip a little sooner than that. So I think if you go down to 50%, it's like -8 or something like that. But as I start to put the gain on this, you'll notice the sine wave, its amplitude is going to increase, and it's going to hit this wall and start to clip it and start to square it out. So let's watch how that happens. And now you can see it doesn't take on the full-on shape of a square wave, but it has totally squared out, and in return it has given us some overtones. So let's check that out with the spectrum analyzer, which as opposed to the oscilloscope will show you where your frequencies are at, and this will show you your waveform. So let's shut the clipper off, and let's go back to that regular sine wave. Oh, let me turn that on. Okay, this is our sine wave right here, right? This is where it's hitting. It has no overtones, right? But if I put on the clipper that we just clipped the crap of it out, clip the crap out of it, this is what that's looking like now. And as you can see, we've added all these overtones of that sine wave into the mix here. What that will allow you to do is, add higher tones that represent the sub, right? So if you just had a clean sine wave in your song and you didn't have anything in this low mid range, you may not hear the sub bass in the track, or at least a representation of the sub bass in the track coming out of a cell phone or maybe even some car speakers, because they just don't play sub frequencies. For me, I like to use it in a way that's more of just distorted bass in my drop. I like it, but this is something that you can add in even just as a layer to sort of fatten up your mix when you have nothing kind of playing in this area. That's why like a lot of trap music will do this, because they'll have some rock and sub bass, they'll have some high end noise that's playing in the trap song, and then what's going on in here? Well, if you distort your sub, you can sort of fill in this part of your frequency spectrum here in your mix, and fatten up your mix and make your song sound more complete. So as you can tell though, the clipping is just not enough, right? Although that doesn't sound terrible, but maybe that's not what you're going for. At least for me, that's not enough for what I'm typically going for. So I'm gonna start off using this amp plugin on 100% and put it on rock. And I'm doing this because it's a stock Ableton plugin, and I want to show you how I would go about, distorting using stock stuff. Then I'll show you some aftermarket stuff. So um, let's see how that sounds now just by distorting the sine wave. Okay, and you could even distort and clip, right? So sounding a little better. You got the distortion on it. The lead, the heavy. This is some different types of distortion. Let's just play around with how that sounds. Still not exactly what I'm going for, at least in one of my tracks. Uh, but clipping essentially is sort of like leveling out. The leveler will be a little bit more. The limiter, right, will be a little bit more softer in its function of capping sounds at a certain dB. It's going to actively be pushing them down, leveling them out. The clipper is just going to cut them off. And that's what you were seeing on that oscilloscope is the clipper is just cutting them off at a certain decibel and then, giving us that sort of sound that we're going for that you can't get out of a limiter. Um, if we put a limiter, and like I said, I think it was minus 8 dB, and I shut the clipper off, and I shut this amp off, and I set this to minus 8 dB, and I start cranking up the gain. I mean, I got this cranked up, but obviously it gives you some overtones, but not as much as the clipper will, right? So the key to distorting these sub bass is adding in white noise. So that would sound like this, right? I'm now adding in all this information that once you distort it is going to really make this sub bass gritty. Now it's starting to sound a little bit more heavy and impactful. But for me, the stock amp plugin, I might use it on top of whatever I'm doing as another layer of post processing. But that's still not 100% for me. But we could try another free plugin here, Camel Crusher. This is a distortion plugin. Let's turn that on. To me, that sounds a little better than even the amp plugin. And you could kind of run through the different patches here. Right, throw the amp on it, maybe clean, only 12%, and clip. Now we got something going on, right? But for me, I'm going to use this trash plugin, and I like to go over to this distort. They have several different things you can do: saturate, heavy, fuzz, drive. I go to the distort, and I tend to use this clip control. Again, this is just, I'm showing you how I like to do it. And I use this trash plugin from iZotope that you do have to pay for. And essentially, you just increase the drive. So let's see how that sounds. All right, I got the amp on. And that's what that would sound like. And as you can see, as we've distorted this sub bass, it has not only increased the amplitude of the sub, but it has added in all these resonant frequencies. We're filling in the mix, and even could be, one of the main sounds in your drop that you're hearing people use, especially myself. So once you have that bass sounding where you want it, say, let me just add in this amp. Let me add the clipper on. I'm gonna bring it down though. I wouldn't be needing that much gain anymore because I'm doing it through the distortion here. But maybe I just want to clip it to add an extra layer of sort of that distortion, saturation noise, and also cap it so I can easily mix it in. It doesn't have varying dB. But the thing is now I can't just run this, or I wouldn't just run this like this because my sub is now shooting through the roof here, and I have no control over my sub and the rest of this noise. So what I would do is once I got my bass sounding the way I want it, I would duplicate it out, right? I would make one my bass, right? And that would go into my bass group, and then one my sub, and that would go into my subgroup. And I'd go back to the sub, and you could essentially delete all this stuff, right? And get it back, shut the white noise off, and get it back to clean sine wave. Now the reason why I could hear it, because I still had the bass on. Back to a clean sine wave. Typically though, I would use the sub part of the serum for my sub, so I'm going to shut that off. I'm going to go back to the bass, and I'm going to actually turn that on. I'd rather use the sub oscillator. I think it has a little more impact, and let's just verify that sounds similar to what we had going before. I might even take it a step further, put on some distortion in serum on the sub, drive 30. That'll help fatten it up, and the noise is on direct out, so it's not being affected by the serum distortion. I'll go back over here so we have congruency, and distort, tube, drive 30, on. Okay. Now, what I would do is I have my sub. My sub is now a separate track that I can EQ differently. So what I would do is roll off the high-end information, say to about 220, and roll off your extreme lows. And now my sub is EQ'd. Got a little bit of overtones. My sub is EQ'd. I got a little bit of overtones from the distortion in serum. And depending on how you want to mix down your sub, you could play around with how high the frequency is. I got it set to 220 right now for the purposes of this video. You're still getting a little bit of overtones out of the sub itself. And then the bass, I would do the opposite. I would take my EQ8 and I would roll it off the low end up to 220. So now I got this going on. And there's still a little bit of overtones in there. That's why I tend to use like Pro Q or something. It kind of works a little better, but in this video I'm just going to use these stock plugins. We could see what happens if I move it up to like 300. But now what we've done is separated the sub and the bass, and that sounds like this. Right? And maybe this is a little too loud, right? And maybe my sub is a little too quiet. Okay, so, but essentially just what I showed you there is now that we've separated the sub track and we get that clean sine wave, or essentially clean, right? And we have that distorted sine wave with the white noise, I can now affect them differently, EQ them differently, mix them differently, and that allows me to have more dynamic control in my mix and in my track, and allow me to keep my sub bass clean and clear and hard hitting in my tracks. So, that's how I would go about doing that. Hopefully this was cool. I will say that the white noise it does a lot of the heavy lifting, and we could prove that right here. But yeah, that's how I would distort a sub. I hope this was helpful. Maybe this is something you can incorporate in your songs. And happy music making from Revs in the studio. Thanks for watching.